Okay, so on to our final speaker for this evening. It's Dr. Tony Breslin. Tony is a teacher by profession and a public policy analyst and writer specializing in education. He's the author of Lessons from Lockdown, the Educational Legacy of COVID-19, and is currently working on a new book, Bubble Schools and the Long Road from Lockdown. And he's going to talk to us about those lessons learned from the pandemic and how they might enable us to shape the future of educational provision. So, Tony, if you're there,
I am.
I will hand over to you then.
Thank you very much, and it's an absolute pleasure to be part of this evening. I'm hoping now that colleagues can see my screen. I was going to talk without the slides, but I kind of lost my nerve listening to everybody else's inspiring contribution. We'll perhaps talk more about that when we come back as a panel. But what I kind of want to do this evening is just what that's the subliminal advertising slide. And you'll get a set of these slides afterwards, and they take you through the process and the research and all of that. I don't want to dwell on that this evening with the time that we've got. What I just want to talk about is what my and our intention was with Lessons from Lockdown and with Bubble Schools. And, you know, although I'm kind of identified as the author, these books are a product of exactly the kind of collaboration that Lisa's just been talking about, of people giving their time generously, speaking with us, sharing thoughts and so forth. I also on Lessons from Lockdown worked with a brilliant young researcher, Ryan McMahon, which was a terrific benefit. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the headlines, not so much coming out of the first book, Lessons from Lockdown, but coming out of the research process so far. And I'm about 3 weeks off. On the 1st of November, I submit the final text for Bubble Schools. So I'm kind of fairly close to the end of the research process. But if you've got something you want to say to us, do get in touch, all right? What was the intention of all of this? Well, the truth is, my wife's a head teacher and I'm a chair of governors. I work independently, and around February last year, I thought it's going to be an okay year. I've got quite a bit lined up. And then the juggernaut of COVID-19 swung into view, and that was that. And I'd been thinking, I really kind of want to write some stuff for some time, and suddenly I had nothing else to do. That's the honest, personal, well-being story to the writing. But what did I wanted to do? What did I want to do even? I wanted to capture the experience of lockdown in the moment. I wanted to give voice to pupils, parents, educational professionals, various people who volunteer about the system and so forth. I've always been a kind of obsessive about the future of schooling. I wanted us to think, well, you know, might this be the moment when we can begin to draw something positive from all this tragedy and really think about how we do education. And so that was the intention. I'm going to go straight to the headlines. As I say, deep in the slide set, you will find a method and research technique and all of that stuff. Now, like most of these findings, I think you as teachers will recognise many of them, and you might say some of them are a bit like finding out that more people go to the beach in the summer. But I hope there's some really fresh stuff as well. So first of all, right, schools have multiple functions. We've always known that, but we've also kind of half denied it. You know those snow day reports when people are interviewed on the telly and they say, the schools are shut, we can't get to work. And that always used to really irritate me, because I used to think, and this was before I was a parent, I used to think, I'm not here to look after your kids, I'm here to educate them. Actually, as Danny Coyle, a brilliant London head teacher, put it to me, he said, Tony, if we do all this other stuff, the childcare, the well-being and so on, why don't we just relax with that? And why don't we seek the credit and acknowledgement for it? So we've really seen, haven't we, during COVID-19, that schools are these multiple functions. Yes, educational, of course, but socio-economic, social, as community hubs, as providers of respite from full-time parenting, as we all found as we homeschooled, or many of us found. Secondly, and this has already been said, COVID has not caused the gaps in attainment, the poverty, and the differential experiences that it has exposed. I say sometimes Basil Bernstein, a long time ago, 50 years ago, almost to the day, had an article published asking the question, can schools compensate for society? They wouldn't listen to Basil Bernstein, but they have listened to Marcus Rashford. Third point, and this is really, really important, I think, every child, every family, every school has had a different lockdown. And across the past year or the past 18 months, all of us have had periods as lockdown strugglers, lockdown survivors, and lockdown thrivers. And I think that's important because I think there's one, to think it's all been doomsday, and two, to think it's been the same for everybody, and three, to think it's been constant. And I initially thought those were three separate categories. Actually, they're not. They're phases that we've all moved through. And some of us have spent more in one than in another. But this idea that it's just been a universal experience, I think, is wide of the mark. Next set of headlines, there's only two sets, you'll be pleased to know. The challenge facing schools now is about much more than just catch up. I think Alexa started talking to me because I must have said a word a bit like it. So sorry about the background. That relations, and one of the other speakers, I think Noel, said this, relationships with those families previously labelled hard to reach have typically strengthened during the pandemic. But also some previously compliant students have come back into school after lockdown, maybe posing new challenges, maybe thinking, do I need to run down a corridor every 45 minutes? Do I need to learn in this way, in this formula? The approaches to technology that were novel at the beginning, I mean, I think somebody said the other day, the profession has made a decade's progress in 12 months. And I have to say, from working with people like Alistair Hamill and some of your other colleagues in Northern Ireland, your work around technology, and as Lisa's just shown, has been inspirational. And that flows, of course, into the final headline, that the creativity and innovation system-wide has been incredible. We have to harness it. So some recommendations, very broad brush, and drawn from the research of both books, right? I don't think a lot of these are controversial. That we must concentrate on diagnosis rather than assessment, and social rather than curricular recovery. We must place personalisation and SEND strategies at the heart of teaching and learning. We must capture the positives of lockdown. Two slight contradictories that we're finding. I certainly finding this as a chair of governors in a primary school, that our top-end primary children are much more skilled as independent learners than they've ever been before. But also, as the father of a year 8 child in a secondary school, we're hearing from secondary colleagues that year 7s and year 8s, those just joining secondary school, are more socially immature. And it's interesting, we have both of those. And we need to think about both. We need to identify the specifics of the lockdown experience in our particular settings. And we need to not think about the reintegration of pupils as unproblematic. It's just about getting them back. It's much more than that. And surely we must use this whole experience to reset what matters now rather than what matters then. I realise I've changed my months wrongly there. In terms of national experience, I just want a couple of suggestions, really. One, let's really rebalance the attainment inclusion nexus. Let's not kind of do all we can for attainment and then deal with the exclusion that creates and try and include people afterwards, right? Let's build attainment out of inclusion. Let's go inclusion first. I think personally we need to recommission specialist agencies. So in England we had the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority. It's interesting, we got rid of all the so-called quangos that were to do with development, and we kept all the ones to do with compliance. I think that's the wrong way round. We need massive multi-method longitudinal research studies over the next decade to capture the impact of this, not to try and capture it in the next 3 months. And we need to think about the impact on children and adults and others. We need to develop mechanisms for supporting higher levels of home learning. There will be more of it. There will be more learning off-site. Will upper secondary schooling be full-time a decade or 2 decades from now? Maybe not. I think we have an appetite for learning amongst much of our adults as they strive to fulfill their role in homeschooling. So I think we need to take that as an opportunity for adult and community learning. Not going to worry about the next steps. But what I've done at the end of the slide set is just left some questions. I won't worry about those now, but just on the catch-up thing, I just want to leave one thought. I don't want to sound complacent, but I am not, and I say this as a parent as much as a teacher, I am much less worried about educational catch-up than I am about social catch-up. As a profession, whether it's through work in schools or indeed work in FE and adult ed, with young adults who've come through this, I've no doubt that given the support and the funding, we've got the wherewithal to enable people to catch up on curriculum. But I've got no idea how we enable a 5-year-old to catch up on a year's missed play dates. I've got no idea how we enable a 14-year-old to catch up on the jostling in the corridor that they haven't done this last 18 months. And I know it drove most of us mad as teachers at times. But actually, I think of the staircases of my old school in Harlesden in northwest London, and I kind of think, crikey, it was on those staircases as much as in the rooms that I kind of learned to be an adult. You can judge how successfully. But I think that's really important. And that leads to that, just to re-emphasize this point about the multiple purposes of schooling. With Google, with more independent learning, with parents stepping up as home learners and supporting, I don't think the future's online or offline, it's blended. And I think it may be that the educational role of schools in that narrow sense of what we sometimes mean as educational may indeed be reduced in the long term. But their social role will remain absolutely, absolutely central. And if we ignore the social role of institutions, if we think of what happened when shipyards and coal mines and steelworks closed, yes, they closed maybe because there was no demand for their products, but we lost their social function as well. And I think the real challenge for us going forward is if we can do shopping without shops, if many of us can do work without the workplace, and if we can even do aspects of schooling without schools, it's not the new normal I'm worried about. It's the new social. How are we going to create it? Maybe I'll stop there.
That's great, Tony. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.